Gentles and ladymen, I'm Spiro, and I'm not a wizard. In today's episode, I want to go over the changes that I've made to my intro, learning new things as I go, trying to add new features into it. So the last version we saw looked like this. I'll turn down computer. So this is the version that we last saw, right? So we had a PXG logo, we had this text in the middle with credits, and the scroll text. Now what I did, there was an interim version that I made, which I fixed up these characters. So what I did was, when I switched to this character set, you switch the bank and the offsets that you can refer to in memory. New character set was loaded at 3800 hex. Original c64 character set sits at 2000. What I would do is, using the rasters, I would say, okay, when the screen gets down, when the screen starts up here, use the normal c64, use the normal c64 character set all the way until we get down to here, to before the scroll text, and then switch it into the new character set that I want for the scroll text. And that worked well, and that meant that I got those characters that were giving me that kind of dithered look, and it looked kind of cool. And then the next thing I wanted to try and do was say, well, I want to try and replace. Actually, the first thing I tried to do was try to replace this with a colour washer that would cycle up and down. I've seen example code of colour washers that do a string of text, so I could do, a line easily, but doing one line at a time, doing all these, ended up slowing the code down too much, and the music was jerky, and it was just, my code would really work, but anyway, I got sidetracked, and then I thought I'm going to learn how to load an actual image, and I managed to do that. There's using a few different sources. Robin from 8-Bit Show and Tell made a video on loading a koala graphic, but he did it from the disk drive, not loading it into memory. And then Pooterman on his intro to democoding tutorial loaded a koala image, but he loaded it at memory address 2000. And the code here is kind of a mix of stuff that I got from him and stuff that I got from Robin, I think, and turning on bitmap mode, turning on multicolour mode, setting the right banks. Pooterman's, I think, was a lot easier because it's like, well, you set it at 2000 and the default bank offsets work fine for that. So the background on that is that the Commodore 64 has got 64K of memory, but so that it can address bits of ROM and basic memory and other things, it's got the concept of bank switching. So there are 4 banks, and you set a different bank and it changes where it looks for certain things. So trying to get this code to work by shifting the image to 6000, which is actually the default address where the koala images are supposed to load, from what I understand. Or rather, when they're saved, that is their default start addresses. So trying to get it to load into that was a challenge because of the way the banks worked. So I ended up writing this out, trying to understand better what bits I needed to set. And it kind of helped me work through it all. So the banks are weirdly in reverse order. So bank 0 starts at memory address C1000. Bank 1 starts at memory address 8000. Bank 2 starts at 4000. Bank 3 starts at 0000. And this is the default bank, right? So the default, this is where I kind of started to think of it as like an offset, right? So the offset for where it finds the text screen or the bitmap screen, and where it finds the what was the other thing it looks for? Pointed to the screen memory. So it has the right. So the if I hover over this, it tells you a bit more the memory setup. But so I'm not going to explain this well. I never do. DD00 is where the, was that legible? DD00 is where the bank select is done, but then DO18 is where you say, okay, well, this is where I want to configure the bitmap memory or the pointer to the screen memory. So normally when we're putting characters on screen, we're doing it at 0400. Bitmap memory, oh, that's the bitmap memory or the character memory. I think if we highlight that, so in text mode, yeah, pointed to character memory. So it's where it finds the Petsky character set. So by default, DD00 points to bank 3. This, because we're not in bitmap mode, we're in text mode, the default is 2000 for the character offset, and the pointer to screen memory is 0400. So the multicolor and bitmap modes get set here, DO11, DO16. I don't want to go into too much detail, although I probably am anyway. To load a bitmap, you've got to turn on bitmap mode. And I guess if you've got a multicolor bitmap, you've got to turn on multicolor mode. But when you're displaying the text, you've got to turn bitmap mode back off and turn multicolor mode back off if you're only doing, unless you're doing multicolor text. In my case, I wasn't. So we can, the interesting thing about the c64, the way it works is that with the rasters, the raster lines, you can switch different portions of the screen into different screen modes. So partway down the screen, when I want to start drawing my bitmap, I can switch it into bitmap mode and multicolor mode. And then when I get further down, when I've got my scroll text, I want to turn off bitmap mode and multicolor mode. And also actually switch banks. I actually wanted to switch banks for the image and then switch back for the text. So yeah, this was me playing to try and understand how to shift it to 6000, which I needed to do for my intro, because if I go down to the bottom, I've got the where all the segments are. So I couldn't leave the image at 2000 because my data would have overwritten it and my music would have overwritten it. So I had to shift it up. Could have done 4000 and I chose 6000. Yeah, so let me show you what the new version looks like. Again, there is music, but I've muted the machine. Takes a bit longer to load. There's a lot more in memory now. There's a big graphic. So now we've got a graphic. Now ignore these bars here, these little short ones. Those are so that I could get an indication of what raster line I was setting bitmap mode on and what raster line I was turning bitmap mode off. So idle is going to be my handle, I guess. I was talking to one of my friends and I used to use that handle back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, yeah. So you can see here we go into text mode to display this header. Nice colour wash effect. Probably goes a bit too fast. I'll probably try and slow that down. Go into bitmap mode, show the image. Go into text mode, show the scroll text. Rinse and repeat. So the code for that, let's start at the top. Make that a bit wider. As I said, this stuff here really helped me understand and get to grips with where I should be shifting stuff around, and the fact that the banks are acting as an offset for the bitmap and the screen memory, which is interesting. So I've got the usual, I've set some basic variables for when I want to place stuff on the screen. I've got offsets for the Koala graphics data. So there's on Codebase 64 there's a page which tells you about the different image formats and where stuff sits. Koala format is normally, if it loads at 6000, then at 7F40 is where the bitmap screen memory information is. So 6000 is where the bitmap itself actually is. I'm not sure what about. I don't understand that breakdown yet. So if we go 6000, 8328 is where the color memory information is, and then there's 1 byte right at the end of the file, which is at 8710, and that tells you the background color for the bitmap. So again, because these are offsets, when loading it into 2000 originally, basically had to point to 2000 plus these offsets. So this just allows me to shift the image around anywhere in memory and not have to change my code, because I just still use these offsets and they're still valid for within the Koala file itself. Now I've got a bunch of constants where I set the raster interrupts that will hit, which raster line will trigger each of my interrupts. So at the moment I've got 6 interrupts triggering. Very top line, so raster line 00, the music will run. Raster line 5A, I turn bitmap mode on. Raster line DA, I turn bitmap mode off. At E0, I do my first raster bar, so that's the first white bar you see across the screen. EA is where the scroll text triggers. FA is where the last raster bar sits. So I use those because I've got a macro that where is my macros? So I call up a macro called set IRQ, and then I pass it two parameters. One which is those constants you saw up above, which was the raster line that it triggers on, and then the second parameter is the routine that it will call. So that's the interrupt vector that will be called on that raster line. So yeah, then we go into the code. We've got normal initialization stuff. We load the music, we initialize the music, clear the screen, and this is where I load the bitmap itself. So now I basically copy it from where it's stored at 6000 into the correct memory location for when I do this bank switching. So you'll note that the screen RAM, even though we've set the pointer to screen RAM as 0400, that's offset by 4000 because we're going to be in bank 2. So we're actually writing to 4400. Yeah, so that was a gotcha for me at the beginning. I was going, well, why isn't stuff coming up all right? The colours were showing up all right, but the actual screen information wasn't. So that was because I was putting it in the wrong place. But for some reason, the colour memory is always at D800. Cool. So we shift this around. We put the image into 6000. This, where it gets printed on the screen in memory, it changes. Color memory doesn't. So this is where I display the header text, which is that little asterisk, not a wizard, at the top with the color wash. So you can see here I'm now going, so bank 3, just to make sure that I was putting everything in the right place. Bank 3 and $18 in the memory setup register. That's DO18. So these are, as I understand it, the defaults when the c64 boots. Because bank 3 is the top bank, which starts at 00. And in fact, I can probably take that out because I change that back and forth in my raster interrupts. But there's a lot of commented out code here in this version that I'll take out before I upload it to my GitHub, and that and a lot of it is me playing around. For example, trying to figure out when stuff wasn't printing. I thought I'll just print it at the top of the screen. So this will load the text, center it on the screen, and then set the colors to white at the beginning. Again, I probably didn't even need to do that part because I added a color wash later, but initially I set it to white. And then I set the text colors for the scroller. Now this was a funny one because I commented that code out a while back. I can't remember what else that was attached to. Yeah, see, text colors here. When I was displaying the logo, I also just changed the text colors, but the text colors was actually changing the text color for my scroll text, not my logo. So I had to put that back in because I was like, everything was working, but I couldn't see my scroll text. Is my scroll text displaying? Turns out it was, but I had wiped over the colors when I loaded this, the bitmap colors into color memory. So that's again why I had to specify the colors here after I had done the bitmap load. So this changes all the colors on the entire screen, and I couldn't see anything else. So set the text colors for my scroller. Lots of commented out code of other things. This was the credits that I was printing. Load the scroll text into the base memory address because I refer to those memory addresses. Set up the interrupt initialization code, and then we set up our first IRQ, which is the music playing routine. So now we get into we hand the CPU over to the IRQs. We keep the CPU busy while the IRQs run everything in the background. So again, what I did here was because it's at the top of the screen, I switched to the default bank 3, and set up the pointers. Now that's 1E, not 1.8, because 1.8 would point to character memory at 2000. I've overwritten that. And 1E, E, in fact, the 1 refers to this pointer to screen memory. The E is those bits which refers to my because it's in text mode, it refers to character memory at 3800 hex, and that's where my character set is. So changes bank, points to the right character set, and then does the color wash routine, and then it does the music play routine. So I had a bit of extra cycles to play around with up here because there's not much happening at the top of the screen. So then I set the next IRQ, which is to turn bit mode on. Now I've got that just so that I could be certain that that was working at the right place. That was useful for me figuring out the raster line triggers. I set bit mode on, set multicolor mode on, switch to bank 2, which starts at 4000. Because my image is at 6000, the banks only start at 0, 4, 8 and C 1000. So we had to go to 4000 and then set an offset of 2000. So kind of, yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. It took a while to work through in my head, and again that's why I wrote this out and started putting stuff down exactly as binary numbers, so I could go, okay, what do I need to do to understand it? So yeah, that turns bitmap mode on, and because we've already copied the image into memory, it's basically putting the how am I going to explain it? So the image is already in memory, and we're basically switching to the correct memory banks because we're updating the screen, 60 times a second or 50 times a second. We are, we can tell the C64 to. That's why we can say this part of the screen can be this mode, this part of the screen can be a different mode. Because of the screen redrawing, it's basically, when we get to this point, it goes, oh, I'll just point you to this location in memory. When it gets to this point down here, it goes, oh, I'll just switch back to that other point in memory. And that's how it displays it. If we didn't turn bitmap mode on, let's just comment out there. Should I do that? Well, I'll run you through it first. You can play with it. You'll have the code. So yeah, bitmap mode on. We turn on multicolor mode. We switch to the correct bank. Then we want to turn added once we know the image has redraw has been done. Once we're past that point, we turn bitmap mode back off. So this is DO11. We're ORing 32. So to turn that off, we AND 255 minus 32. And to turn multicolor mode on, we ORed 16. So to turn it off, we AND 255 minus 16. And then switch it back to bank 3, which sets our offset to 0, 0. And then again, we go back to our correct character set. And then we do the bottom raster bar A, puts that white line. Set the next IOQ for the scroll text. Then once that's done, it sets the second raster bar. And then once that's done, it goes back up to the top. So that's basically the breakdown of how it works. We've got the wash header, which is the code for the scroll text. This is the code that I can probably take out now because that was me trying to wash the line by line rather than here, which just does character by character. So that wasn't a success. Wash logo macro. Nothing else is calling that, so I can take that out. There's other stuff calling that. So this is my text color. So this is the rest of the routines that we've got. Blah blah blah. We go to our data. So I've still got this stuff in here which I can probably take out as well. Yep, the only thing that references that is commented out. Wash line. I don't think I need wash line. Oops. Wash line was my failed attempt, so I can comment out those guys. Scroll text base, we need that. There's a scroll text. Blah blah blah. Logo. We don't use that anymore. Display logo. But nothing calls display logo. Alright. So I can comment that out. And this will shrink down the code, the code size. Logo. Okay, so now we get into where we load the information, where we load all the binary information. So we've got our character set that loads at 3800 hex. The music loads based on magic code by Kick Assembler, and the bitmap loads at 6000. So it loads at 6000. I've set up this variable, which is how I refer to it. I think I did, yeah. So when I'm copying stuff, I go bitmap plus bitmap screen memory. So that is the, remember I was saying that bitmap screen mem I configured as an offset, and that offset is on top of where the image loads. So the image loads at 6000. So that just means that if I want to shift the image anywhere else, mostly all I've got to do is just change this. The other gotcha will be the screen memory, so I need to clean that up and put the screen memory referenced better. But it's weird because it's based on the bank, not where the image is. So I've got to clean that up. But yeah, let's save that and see if I've still got a working. We run it. Hopefully it should still work. Touch wood with all the commented out code I've just done. Go. So yeah, we're getting there. What I next want to do is try and figure out how this. Oh, I'll tell you about how I did that graphic. But I do want to shrink it because it came out a lot bigger than I thought it would. What I did was character set logo generator. Here we go. So there's a web page here. I'll leave comments down below. I'll leave a link in the description box. So if I go Buttweasel, right, you can set that to be in different fonts. Now what is cool about this is that it tells you the size is 490 by 98, and there's a little exclamation mark there. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Little exclamation mark which indicates that what you've typed in won't fit on the Commodore screen. So they're very thoughtful. So if you choose a different font to something that fits, you can change colours in this, which is kind of cool. So if I want that to be purple over top, I can do that. So, which is a bit different to the default, which is kind of cool. This is a real nice thing. It, like heaps of different fonts that you can choose from. Real cool stuff. This is awesome. Love this. And then what I did was, because that saves it as a PNG file, I went to RetroPixels, dragged the image onto here. Now the one caveat is that it turns on dithering by default, which made the image look weird. So the only thing I did different was to disable dithering. You can play with that if you make your own image, see how it looks. But yeah, this is real cool. Worked out really well. So yeah, I have to figure out how to shrink that logo down, because the logo that I had didn't take up the whole screen. I think part of that was because of the conversion, and I wasn't sure how to shrink it to say, just fit in here. But that's cool. Gives me something else, next thing to look forward to. I'm going to leave that here. Hopefully I've explained everything well enough that it makes sense. Hope that was useful to you. Hope that shows that, just you take things step by step at a time. You learn one new thing, you add to it, and then you build that up. And eventually I'll figure out how to do timing. That's the one thing, because I've turned off the CIA timing registers, the internal clock doesn't work, and I really wanted to have something which and that's this code here that turns off the CIA interrupts, and one of those is the timer interrupt, because we're basically saying all we want to do is enable raster interrupts, and that's what this does. So we've turned off all other signals in the CPU. So I'm going to have to figure out how I turn on the clock timing interrupts without turning on everything else. And then, that can be used for things like delaying the graphic loading, for example, what I wanted to do initially was to have when I had the credits on the screen, so that they would show up, but they'd show up, I'd put them on the screen, but they'd only be in black, and then add the colour washing in, after a certain time, and that the timing will be useful for doing things like, let's say I was a demo coder and I wanted to time things to certain points in the music. I guess that's how I would do it. I don't know. If you've got any insight onto that, I welcome it. That's kind of just, what I'm running through in my head. Anyway, I'm rambling. Nice to see you. I'll talk to you next time. Figure if I can move my mouse to this screen so I can go